The bullet tore through the wanted poster on the wall, missing Victoria Grayson's head by 3 inches as she bent down to adjust the iron brace strapped around her left leg. She did not scream, did not even flinch, because after 2 years of wearing 30 pounds of medical contraption from hip to ankle, a near miss from some drunk cowboy's pistol barely registered as noteworthy. The saloon erupted in shouts and the scramble of boots, but Victoria just straightened herself with the slow deliberation of someone who had learned that rushing only made the pain worse, and looked toward the swinging doors where the shooter had already fled into the Colorado night. "You all right, Miss Victoria?" Jimmy the bartender called out, his face pale as fresh cream. "Fine as ever, Jimmy." She reached for her cane, the polished oak one her father had carved before the consumption took him, and made her way toward the back room where she kept the account books. Each step produced a faint metallic click from the brace, a sound that had become as familiar as her own heartbeat. The dance hall upstairs thundered with music and stomping feet, the Friday night revelry in full swing, and Victoria felt the familiar ache in her chest that had nothing to do with her injured leg. She had been the best dancer in Breckenridge once, back in 1878 when she was 19, and her legs worked the way God intended. Men had lined up just to watch her perform the quadrille, the waltz, the lively polka that made her skirts fly like a spinning top. Then came the runaway wagon, the sickening crack of bone, and 3 surgeries that left her with a leg that bent at odd angles without the heavy frame of metal and leather that now caged it. The door to her office clicked shut behind her, muffling the noise from the saloon. Victoria sank into her chair with a sigh that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than her lungs. The account books lay open on her desk, showing the declining profits from the dance hall. Men came to drink and gamble, but they wanted dancers who could actually dance, not a crippled bookkeeper who hid in the back rooms and counted their money. She had inherited the Golden Spur Saloon from her father 6 months ago, and it was slowly dying under her management, not because she lacked business sense, but because she lacked the ability to be what the business needed. A knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called, expecting Jimmy with the evening's receipts. Instead, a man she had never seen before stepped into her office, and Victoria found herself straightening in her chair despite the pain it caused. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with shoulders that filled the doorframe and hands that looked like they could break a man's jaw without much effort. But his eyes were what caught her attention, a pale green like winter sage, and they held an expression that seemed almost apologetic as they took in her braced leg without the usual flicker of pity or disgust she had come to expect. "Miss Grayson." His voice was rough as creek gravel but not unkind. "Name's Austin Ellis. I'm here about the marshal position." Victoria blinked. The marshal position was filled 2 weeks ago. Then somebody unfilled it this morning when Marshal Hendricks took a bribe from the Carter gang and rode out of town with his pockets full of gold. Austin Ellis removed his hat, revealing dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. "Mayor sent word to Denver. I was already on my way to Leadville, so I took a detour. If you'll have me, I'll start tonight." "I'm not the mayor," Victoria said, though something in her chest had tightened at his presence in a way that had nothing to do with authority or law enforcement. "You should speak with Mayor Turnbull." "Already did. He said the town council needs to approve the appointment and you're on the council. Also said you're the only one with a lick of sense among the lot of them." Austin's mouth quirked in what might have been a smile if it had been allowed to fully form. "He's gathering the others now, but I wanted to introduce myself proper. This your establishment, my father's. Mine now, I suppose." Victoria gestured at the chair across from her desk. "Sit if you like. This might take a while. The council moves slower than molasses in January. Austin sat, his movements economical and precise, like a man who had spent time in the cavalry and never quite lost the discipline. He was probably 30 or 31, Victoria judged, with the kind of weathered face that came from years under the sun. A scar ran along his jawline, pale and thin, and his hands bore the calluses of hard work. "You run the place alone?" he asked, and there was genuine curiosity in his voice, not the condescending surprise she usually heard. "I have staff. Jimmy tends bar, Mary and Ruth work the dance hall upstairs, and I have a cook and a cleaning woman who come in daily." Victoria closed the account book, suddenly self-conscious about the red ink bleeding through several pages. "It's not as profitable as it was when my father ran it, but we manage." Seems like a lot for one person to handle, especially with. He trailed off, and Victoria felt herself bristle, especially with my leg. She heard the sharpness in her own voice and regretted it immediately, but pride was a hard habit to break. "I manage just fine, Mr. Ellis." "I was going to say especially with the current trouble in town," Austin said mildly, those sage green eyes steady on hers. "Didn't mean anything by the other. My sister walks with a limp from polio. Never slowed her down much, though folks seem to think it should." Victoria felt heat creep into her cheeks. "I apologize. I'm used to people making assumptions." "No need. World's full of fools with opinions they didn't earn the right to have." Austin leaned back in his chair, which creaked under his weight. "Tell me about the trouble here." Mayor gave me the outline, but I find it's better to hear it from folks who live with it day to day. For the next 20 minutes, Victoria found herself talking more freely than she had in months, explaining how the Carter gang had been terrorizing Breckenridge for nearly a year, how they extorted money from businesses, how they shot up saloons for fun and ran off anyone who tried to stand against them. She told him about the 3 marshals before Hendricks, how each had either died, disappeared, or been run out of town. She did not tell him about her leg, about how she had been caught in the middle of one of the Carter gang's rampages when that wagon had crushed her, but something in his eyes suggested he had already guessed. "Sounds like the Carters need a lesson in manners," Austin said when she finished. "How many of them are there?" 7, last count, led by Tom Carter and his brother Jack. The others are hired guns, mean as rattlesnakes and twice as quick to strike. Victoria studied his face, looking for signs of the fear that should have been there and finding none. "You understand what you're walking into. This isn't some ordinary town marshal job. This is a death sentence waiting to happen. Then I'd better make sure it's not my death that happens." Austin stood, placing his hat back on his head with a motion so smooth it might have been choreographed. "I should go find the mayor and the council, but I'd like to come back tomorrow if that's acceptable. Talk more about the situation, maybe get your thoughts on strategy." "My thoughts?" Victoria heard the surprise in her own voice. "I'm just a saloon owner, Mr. Ellis." "You're a woman who's managed to keep her business running and her staff safe, despite a gang of cutthroats trying to bleed this town dry. That's more than most men I've met could claim." He moved toward the door, then paused, looking back at her with an expression she could not quite read. "Also, I heard you used to dance, before the accident." Victoria's hand tightened on her cane. "That was a long time ago, must miss it. Every day." The words escaped before she could stop them, naked and raw in the small space between them. She cleared her throat, trying to regain her composure. "But we don't always get to do what we love, do we?" "No," Austin agreed quietly. "But sometimes we find new ways to make music, even when the old songs are gone." He left before she could respond, and Victoria sat in the sudden silence of her office, wondering what he had meant by that. Through the floorboards, the dance hall music continued, a lively fiddle tune that made her ruined leg ache with remembered motion. She had not cried about her injury in over a year, had thought herself beyond such weakness, but something about Austin Ellis's words had cracked open a door she had carefully kept locked. The council meeting happened without her. Mayor Turnbull sent word that they had approved Austin Ellis as the new marshal, along with a note that said Victoria's vote had been counted as yes in her absence. She should have been annoyed at the presumption, but instead she found herself standing at her window, watching the street below where a tall figure in a dark coat was making his way toward the marshal's office. Even from this distance, she could see the confidence in his stride, the way he moved like a man who knew exactly what he was about and did not need anyone's permission to do it. Mary knocked on the door, poking her head in with a grin that suggested mischief. "Heard the new marshal's quite the looker. You seen him yet? He was here earlier." Victoria turned from the window, grateful for the dim lamplight that hid her expression. "Seems competent enough." "Competent?" Mary laughed, a bright sound like bells. "That's one word for it." Ruth saw him outside and nearly fainted. Said he had eyes like a mountain cat and shoulders that could carry the world. Ruth is 19 and thinks every man is destined to sweep her off her feet. But Victoria could not quite keep the smile from her voice. Ruth was a sweet girl, earnest and romantic, everything Victoria herself had been before life taught her harder lessons. Maybe this one will sweep someone off their feet. Mary's eyes gleamed with speculation. Been too long since we had a good romance in this town. Last wedding was the blacksmith's daughter, and that was 6 months back. The town doesn't need romance. It needs law and order. Victoria returned to her desk, shuffling papers that did not need shuffling. "And I need to finish these books before midnight. Was there something you wanted, Mary?" "Just checking on you after that shooting earlier. Scared me half to death when I heard." Mary's expression turned serious. "You need to be more careful, Miss Victoria. Those Carter boys don't care who they hurt." "I'm always careful." Victoria gestured at her leg. "What more can they do to me?" Mary opened her mouth, closed it, then shook her head. "Plenty, and you know it. Promise me you'll stay out of trouble." "I promise to try." It was the best Victoria could offer, and they both knew it. Mary sighed and left, pulling the door closed behind her with a soft click. Victoria worked on the accounts until her eyes burned and her back ached from sitting. The numbers refused to improve no matter how many times she added them. And finally she gave up, closing the books and extinguishing the lamp. The saloon had gone quiet, the late hour driving most customers home or upstairs to the rented rooms. She made her way through the main room, her cane clicking against the floorboards, nodding to Jimmy, who was wiping down the bar. "Good night, Miss Victoria." "Good night, Jimmy." "Don't forget to lock up." "Never do." The night air hit her like a cold slap as she stepped outside, crisp with the promise of autumn. September in the Colorado mountains meant the aspen trees were starting to turn gold, and the nights carried a chill that seeped into bones and old injuries alike. Victoria pulled her shawl tighter and began the slow walk to her boarding house 3 streets over. She could have lived above the saloon, but she needed some separation between her work and her life, some place that was hers alone. She had made it halfway down Main Street when she heard the footsteps behind her, too heavy and too deliberate to be coincidence. Victoria's hand tightened on her cane, her heart picking up speed even as she told herself not to panic. Breckenridge was dangerous, but it was not suicidal to walk the streets at night, usually. Well, if it ain't the crippled saloon girl. Victoria recognized the voice before she turned. Jack Carter, younger brother to the gang's leader, mean drunk and meaner sober. He stood about 10 feet behind her, swaying slightly, a bottle in one hand and a revolver in the other. Two of his men flanked him, both grinning like wolves who had cornered a rabbit. "Mr. Carter." Victoria kept her voice level, though her pulse hammered in her throat. "It's late. You should go home. Don't tell me what I should do." Jack lurched forward a step, his eyes glittering with malice and whiskey. "You think you're so high and mighty, don't you? Too good to serve drinks like the other girls. Too good to smile at a man when he asks nice. I'm the owner, not the staff. If you have a complaint about service, you can bring it to me during business hours." Victoria shifted her weight slightly, calculating whether she could make it to the boarding house before he caught her. The answer was no, not with her leg, not without a miracle. "I got a complaint right now." Jack raised the revolver, pointing it lazily in her direction. "Complaint is you're uppity. Complaint is you need to learn your place. Complaint is that leg of yours makes you useless for anything fun, so I don't know why we let you keep breathing." "That's enough, Carter." The voice came from the shadows to Victoria's left, and then Austin Ellis stepped into the street, his own gun drawn and aimed with steady precision at Jack's head. He must have been following her, Victoria realized, or watching from somewhere nearby. The thought should have annoyed her, the presumption of protection without permission, but instead she felt a rush of relief so strong it made her knees weak. "Well, hell," Jack laughed, a sound with no humor in it. "The new marshal. Didn't take you long to stick your nose where it don't belong." "My nose belongs exactly where trouble is, and trouble seems to be right here." Austin moved forward slowly, positioning himself between Victoria and the three men. "Now you're going to put that gun away and go sleep off whatever you've been drinking. And tomorrow, you're going to apologize to Miss Grayson for threatening her. Those are your choices. Apologize." Jack's face darkened. "You think you can come into our town and tell us what to do? My brother's going to hear about this. I expect he will. And when he does, you tell him I'm looking forward to meeting him properly." Austin's voice was calm, almost conversational, but there was steel underneath. "Now move along before I decide to run you in for public drunkenness and threatening a citizen. The jail's not comfortable this time of year." For a long moment, Victoria thought Jack would pull the trigger, would start a gunfight right there in the street that would end with bodies and blood. But something in Austin's eyes must have penetrated the whiskey fog, because Jack finally lowered his gun with a curse and stumbled backward. "This ain't over," he snarled, pointing a finger at Austin. "You hear me? This ain't over. It is for tonight." Austin did not lower his own gun until Jack and his men had disappeared around the corner, their boots and curses fading into the darkness. Then he holstered the weapon and turned to Victoria, his expression concerned. "You hurt?" "No." Victoria realized she was shaking and tried to stop, tried to pull herself together, but her body was not cooperating. "Thank you. He might have killed me, or he might have just wanted to scare you. Either way, I'm glad I was here." Austin offered his arm, a gesture so old-fashioned and courtly that it caught Victoria off guard. "Let me walk you home. I don't think they'll come back tonight, but I'd rather be sure." Victoria hesitated, then took his arm, feeling the solid strength of muscle beneath the fabric of his coat. They walked in silence for a few moments, her cane clicking a rhythm against the boardwalk, his steps matching hers without comment or complaint. He did not try to hurry her or offer to carry her, and she appreciated that more than she could say. "You were following me," she said finally, not quite a question. "I was making my rounds and happened to be going in the same direction." But there was something in his tone that suggested he was not quite telling the truth, and Victoria found herself smiling despite everything. "Marshal Ellis, are you saying you were deliberately patrolling near my route home?" "I'm saying this town has a problem with violence against its citizens, and I take that seriously." Austin glanced down at her, and in the moonlight his eyes looked almost silver. Also, the mayor mentioned you'd had some trouble before. Seemed worth keeping an eye out. I can take care of myself. I don't doubt it, but even the strongest people deserve to have someone watching their back once in a while. They had reached the boarding house, a two-story structure with faded yellow paint and a porch that sagged slightly on the left side. Austin released her arm and tipped his hat. I'll say good night here, Miss Grayson. Lock your door and windows. If you hear anything concerning, you fire a shot and I'll come running. You assume I have a gun. I assume anyone living in Breckenridge in 1880 has sense enough to own a weapon. His mouth quirked in that almost smile again. Am I wrong? No. Victoria pulled her key from her pocket, suddenly reluctant to go inside and end this strange, charged conversation. Will you really come back tomorrow to talk about strategy, if you'll have me? I meant what I said earlier. Your perspective is valuable. Austin took a step back, shadows claiming half his face. Also, I'd like to know you better, if that's not too forward. Victoria's heart did something complicated in her chest. It's not too forward. Come by the saloon around 2. It's quiet then and we can talk without interruption. 2:00. I'll be there. He touched the brim of his hat again, a gesture that was becoming familiar already, and then he was gone, melting into the darkness with the practiced ease of a man who knew how to move unseen. Victoria let herself into the boarding house and climbed the stairs to her room on the second floor, each step an exercise in pain management and stubborn will. Her landlady, Mrs. Henderson, was already asleep, the house silent except for the creak of old wood and the distant sound of a dog barking. Inside her small room, Victoria locked the door and sank onto her narrow bed, her leg throbbing with exhaustion. She thought about Austin Ellis, about the way he had looked at her without pity, the way he had stood between her and danger without hesitation. She thought about his words, about making new music when the old songs were gone, and wondered what he had meant, wondered if he could possibly understand what it felt like to lose the thing you loved most and have to build a life from the wreckage. Sleep came slowly, filled with dreams of dancing and gunshots, of sage-green eyes and the click of her cane against wooden floors. When she woke the next morning, sun streaming through her window and birds singing in the cottonwood tree outside, Victoria's first thought was of Austin Ellis and the promise of 2:00. The morning passed in the usual blur of activity. Victoria checked inventory, paid bills, negotiated with suppliers who wanted to raise their prices, and dealt with a broken window in the dance hall that someone had apparently put a chair through during last night's revelry. By noon, she was tired enough to consider canceling her meeting with Austin, but the thought of disappointing him sent her to her small washstand to freshen up and change into a clean dress, a dark blue one that brought out her eyes and did not make her look quite so much like an overworked businesswoman. She was downstairs reviewing the liquor order when Austin arrived, exactly at 2:00, his punctuality somehow both surprising and expected. He had cleaned up since last night, his dark hair still damp from washing and his shirt freshly pressed. He carried a leather satchel under one arm and wore his gun belt with the casual confidence of someone who knew how to use it but hoped he would not have to. Miss Grayson. He removed his hat as he approached her table. Thank you for making time. Thank you for saving my life last night. Victoria gestured to the chair across from her. Coffee. Jimmy makes it strong enough to wake the dead. Coffee would be good. Jimmy brought 2 cups and a plate of biscuits without being asked, his eyebrows raised in silent question that Victoria ignored. When they were alone again, Austin opened his satchel and pulled out a notebook and a rough map of Breckenridge that looked like he had drawn it himself that morning. I've been thinking about the Carter gang, he said, spreading the map on the table. "They've been operating here for almost a year, which means they're comfortable, maybe too comfortable. They have routines, patterns. Tell me about them." For the next hour, Victoria found herself engaged in the kind of strategic conversation she had not had since her father died. Austin asked detailed questions about the gang's movements, their habits, where they drank and gambled, who they associated with, what businesses they extorted and which ones they left alone. He took notes in a neat, precise hand, occasionally asking her to clarify or elaborate, treating her observations with the same respect he might give a fellow lawman. "They usually hit the bank on Fridays," Victoria said, tracing a line on the map. "Small amounts, never enough to make it worth bringing in federal marshals, but enough to hurt. They also take a cut from most of the businesses on Main Street, except the church and the doctor's office. Tom Carter's superstitious about those. What about your place?" Austin's eyes met hers over the map. "Do they take from you?" "They try. I've paid them off twice, then stopped. My father taught me that once you start paying protection money, you never stop and they never protect you from anything, so I told them no." Victoria's hand tightened on her coffee cup. "That's when they started getting more aggressive. Breaking things, threatening my staff. That's why the dance hall doesn't make what it used to. Hard to keep performers when they're afraid of being shot. You could have left, gone to Denver or back east, started over somewhere safer." It was not a criticism, just an observation, and Victoria appreciated the distinction. "This is my home. My father built this business from nothing, and I'm not going to let some gang of thugs drive me away." She heard the defiance in her own voice and softened it slightly. "Besides, where would I go? What would I do? I'm not exactly suited for most kinds of work anymore, because of your leg." Austin set down his pencil, his attention fully on her now. "Can I ask what happened?" Victoria hesitated, then found herself telling him the story she usually kept locked away. 2 years ago, October of '78, the Carter gang was just starting to make trouble, and Tom Carter got into a fight with a freight driver outside my father's saloon. Things escalated, and Carter spooked the man's horses. The wagon broke loose and came barreling down the street. I was crossing to the general store and did not see it until too late." She paused, the memory as vivid as if it had happened yesterday. The sound of hooves on packed dirt, the screams of bystanders, her own voice shouting a warning that never quite formed. The impact had been almost gentle at first, just a bump against her hip, and then the wagon wheel caught her left leg and the world exploded into pain and darkness. I woke up 3 days later with Dr. Morrison standing over me, telling me he had saved the leg, but I would never walk normally again. The bones had shattered in 7 places. He did 3 surgeries trying to set them right, but some breaks don't heal the way they should. Victoria touched her braced leg without conscious thought. "He built me this contraption to keep everything stable, said I was lucky to be alive, lucky to keep the leg at all. I didn't feel very lucky. I imagine not." Austin's voice was gentle, but there was an understanding in it that went beyond simple sympathy. "My sister Emily, the one I mentioned, she got sick when she was 12. Polio. It left her left arm weak and her right leg twisted. She was a painter, had real talent, but after she got sick, she couldn't hold a brush steady anymore. Thought her life was over. What did she do? She learned to paint with her other hand. Took her 2 years of practice, but she got good enough to sell her work. Now she runs an art school in Cheyenne, teaching other people who think they can't do what they love." Austin's eyes held a warmth that transformed his whole face. "She told me once that losing what you love teaches you to love differently, not less, just differently." Victoria felt something shift in her chest, a loosening of old grief that she had carried so long it had become part of her skeleton. Your sister sounds like a remarkable woman. She is. You'd like her. Austin picked up his pencil again, but his expression remained thoughtful. This brace you wear, it must be heavy, cumbersome. 30 pounds of metal and leather, feels like 50 by the end of the day. Victoria laughed, but there was no humor in it. I used to dance for hours without getting tired. Now I can barely make it up a flight of stairs without wanting to rest. I saw a dancer once in Santa Fe, a woman who had lost her leg below the knee in a mining accident. She performed with a wooden prosthetic and a cane, and she was beautiful, not despite her injury but including it. She made the cane part of her dance, part of the rhythm. Austin's gaze was steady on hers. I remember thinking that was what courage looked like, not pretending you were not hurt, but refusing to let the hurt define your entire story. Victoria's throat tightened with emotion she did not want to name. I don't dance anymore, Marshal Ellis. Not even with a cane. Maybe not the way you used to, but there are different kinds of dancing. He gathered up his papers and map, sliding them back into his satchel. Thank you for your time and your insights. This will help me figure out how to approach the Carters. When will you move against them? Victoria heard the worry in her own voice and did not try to hide it. They're dangerous, and they don't follow any kind of code. They'll kill you if they get the chance. Then I'll have to make sure they don't get the chance. Austin stood, settling his hat back on his head. In the meantime, I'd like to ask you something that has nothing to do with strategy or gangs or law enforcement. Victoria's heart picked up speed. What? There's a town social next Saturday night, dancing and music in the community hall. Would you do me the honor of accompanying me? He said it simply, without flourish or elaborate persuasion, but something in his expression made it clear the invitation mattered. I can't dance, Marshal Ellis. I thought I made that clear. Victoria heard the bitterness in her own words and regretted it, but the old wound went too deep for easy courtesy. I know, but I thought we could go anyway. Enjoy the music, the company, maybe make our own kind of evening out of it. Austin's mouth curved in a smile that was partly hopeful, partly amused. I'm not much of a dancer myself, truth be told. 2 left feet and no sense of rhythm, but I like music and I'd like to spend time with you. The dancing is optional. Victoria stared at him. This strange man who had walked into her life less than 24 hours ago, and was already appending everything she thought she knew about herself. She should say no, should protect herself from the inevitable disappointment and pain that came from wanting things she could not have. But something in his eyes, in the genuine warmth of his invitation, made her reckless. Yes, she said, the word escaping before caution could stop it. I'll go with you. Austin's smile widened into something that could only be called joyful. That's settled then. I'll call for you at 6 on Saturday. He left before she could change her mind, striding out of the saloon with the confidence of a man who had just won a significant victory. Victoria sat alone at her table, her coffee gone cold and her heart doing strange acrobatics in her chest. She had not been to a social event in 2 years, had not allowed herself to even think about such things, and now she had agreed to attend one with a man she barely knew. Well, I'll be damned, Jimmy said from behind the bar, his voice full of wonder. I never thought I'd see the day. Mind your own business, Jimmy. But Victoria could not quite keep the smile from her face, and when she climbed the stairs to her office a few minutes later, her leg seemed to hurt a little less than usual. The week that followed was unlike any Victoria had experienced since her accident. Austin came by the saloon each afternoon, ostensibly to continue their strategic discussions about the Carter gang, but their conversations ranged far beyond mere tactics. They talked about everything and nothing. His years as a cavalry scout in Arizona, her childhood in Breckenridge when the town was just a mining camp, Books they had read, places they wanted to see, dreams they had abandoned, and dreams they still held. Victoria found herself looking forward to his visits with an anticipation that felt dangerous and exhilarating in equal measure. Austin treated her as an equal, never patronizing or dismissive, never making her feel like her injury defined her entire existence. He asked her opinion on matters of town governance, on how to approach various citizens for information, on whether he should hire a deputy and whom he might trust for the job. And when she offered suggestions, he listened and often implemented them, giving her credit publicly for ideas she had assumed would be dismissed. On Wednesday, he brought her a book of poetry he thought she might enjoy, a worn volume of Whitman that he said had kept him company through many lonely nights on the trail. On Thursday, she invited him to stay for dinner in the saloon's back room, and they ate Jimmy's surprisingly excellent beef stew, while Austin told her stories about his sister Emily and the art school, about his parents who had died of yellow fever when he was 18, about the years he had spent drifting from town to town trying to figure out who he wanted to be. "Why Breckenridge?" Victoria asked, setting down her spoon. "You could have gone to Leadville like you planned, or back to Cheyenne with your sister. Why take a marshal job in a town where 3 lawmen have already failed or died?" Austin was quiet for a moment, his fingers tracing patterns on the rough wood of the table. "Honestly, because the telegram from Mayor Turnbull mentioned you," Victoria's breath caught. "What?" "He said the town needed help, that there was a good woman running a saloon who was being targeted by the gang, that she refused to leave or back down even though she had every reason to run." Austin's eyes met hers, and there was something raw and honest in them that made her chest ache. He said she had been a dancer once, before an accident took that from her, but she still had more courage than most men he knew. "I thought anyone like that deserved someone willing to stand with her." "You came here because of me." Victoria could barely process the words, the implications. "You took this job because of me, partly. Also because I was tired of drifting, tired of being alone. I thought maybe Breckenridge could be a place to settle, to build something that mattered." Austin reached across the table, his hand stopping just short of hers, giving her the choice. "And then I met you, and I knew I had made the right decision." Victoria looked at his hand, calloused and strong, waiting patiently for her permission. She thought about all the reasons she should not let this happen, should not let herself care for someone who lived a dangerous life in a dangerous profession. But courage, she was learning, was not the absence of fear. It was the decision to reach anyway. She placed her hand in his, and Austin's fingers closed around hers with a gentleness that seemed at odds with his size and strength. They sat like that for a long moment, the silence between them full of possibility and promise, and Victoria felt something in her chest that had been frozen for 2 years begin to thaw. Friday afternoon brought Tom Carter himself to the saloon, flanked by 4 of his men, their boots loud on the floor and their presence sucking all the air from the room. Victoria was at the bar going over accounts with Jimmy when they walked in, and she felt the familiar spike of fear and anger that came with any Carter interaction. "Afternoon, Miss Grayson." Tom Carter was older than his brother, somewhere in his 40s, with cold blue eyes and a smile that never reached them. "Heard you been spending time with our new marshal. Thought I'd come by for a friendly chat. If you want to order drinks, you're welcome to. If you're here to cause trouble, you can leave." Victoria did not move from her spot at the bar, though every instinct screamed at her to put distance between herself and these men. "I'm too busy for games today, Mr. Carter." "No games. Just a warning, neighborly-like." Tom approached the bar slowly, his men spreading out to cover the exits. That marshal of yours, he's been asking questions, talking to people who should know better than to talk, making plans that don't concern him. That's troublesome. Marshal Ellis is doing his job. If you have a problem with that, take it up with him. Victoria kept her voice steady, though her hand found her cane beneath the bar. It was not much of a weapon, but it was better than nothing. Oh, I will. But I wanted to talk to you first, seeing as how you seem to be sweet on him. Tom leaned against the bar, too close, his breath reeking of tobacco and whiskey. See, we've been patient with you, Miss Grayson. Patient with your refusal to pay what you owe, patient with your attitude. But patience runs out, especially when people start getting ideas about standing up to us. And that marshal, he's giving people ideas. Good. The word was out before Victoria could stop it, reckless and defiant. This town has lived in fear of you long enough. Maybe it's time someone stood up. Tom's expression darkened. You want to be careful, cripple, real careful. Accidents happen to people who don't watch their step. Would be a shame if something happened to that other leg of yours. Or maybe something happened to your staff. That pretty girl Ruth, she walks home alone most nights. Long way in the dark. Rage flooded through Victoria, hot and purifying. You threaten my people again and I will shoot you myself, gang or no gang. Big words from someone who can barely walk. Tom pushed away from the bar, his smile returning. You tell your marshal we'll be seeing him real soon, and you think about where your loyalties lie, Miss Grayson. With a lawman who'll be dead in a week, or with the people who run this town. They left as noisily as they had arrived, their laughter echoing even after the doors swung shut behind them. Victoria stood frozen at the bar, her heart hammering and her hands shaking with adrenaline and fury. Jimmy touched her arm gently. You all right, Miss Victoria? No, but I will be. She took a deep breath, forcing herself to calm down. Send word to Marshal Ellis. Tell him Tom Carter was here and what he said. And Jimmy, make sure Ruth and Mary don't walk anywhere alone. If they need escort, you or I will provide it. Yes, madam. Austin arrived within 20 minutes, his face set in hard lines when Victoria recounted the confrontation. He listened without interrupting, his jaw tightening when she mentioned the threat against Ruth. They're escalating, he said when she finished. They know I'm planning something and they're trying to scare the town back into submission before I can act. Are they wrong? Victoria leaned against her desk, suddenly exhausted. Will people stand with you, or will they fold when the Carters push back? I don't know, but I know you won't fold, and that's a start. Austin moved closer, and for a moment Victoria thought he might embrace her, but he simply stood there, solid and present. I'm going to end this, Victoria. I'm going to end the Carters and make this town safe again. I promise you that. Don't make promises you might not be able to keep. But Victoria felt the warmth of hope anyway, dangerous and persistent. And don't get yourself killed before Saturday. I have a social to attend and I need an escort. Austin's expression softened into something tender. Wouldn't miss it for the world. He left to make his rounds and Victoria returned to her work, but the fear that had taken root during Tom Carter's visit refused to leave. She had seen too many good men die in Breckenridge, had attended too many funerals, and consoled too many widows. The thought of Austin joining that list made her physically ill. Saturday arrived with unseasonable warmth, the September sun bright and cheerful as if mocking Victoria's nerves. She spent the afternoon in a state of anxious preparation, trying on 3 different dresses before settling on a deep green one that complemented her coloring and did not make her look entirely like an invalid. Mary helped her with her hair, pinning it up in a style that was both elegant and practical, and Ruth contributed a pair of earrings that sparkled with what was probably paste but looked expensive enough. You look beautiful, Miss Victoria, Ruth said, her eyes shining with vicarious excitement. Marshal Ellis is going to forget how to talk when he sees you. Marshal Ellis is going to wonder what he got himself into, agreeing to escort a crippled woman to a dance. But Victoria could not quite suppress the flutter of anticipation in her stomach. She had not dressed up for a social event in so long that it felt both familiar and foreign, like putting on an old coat and finding it no longer fit quite right. Austin arrived precisely at 6, wearing a dark suit that made him look less like a lawman and more like a gentleman, though the gun at his hip remained a stark reminder of who and what he was. His eyes widened when he saw her, and for a moment he simply stood in the doorway of the boarding house parlor, staring. "You look stunning," he said finally, his voice rougher than usual. "I feel like I should have brought flowers or something more than just myself. You're more than enough." Victoria accepted his offered arm, feeling the same thrill she had felt every time they touched, the sense of rightness that defied logic and caution. "Shall we?" The walk to the community hall took 15 minutes at Victoria's pace, but Austin never once showed impatience or tried to hurry her. They talked about inconsequential things, the weather and the new shop opening on Main Street, carefully avoiding any mention of the Carters or danger, or the fact that Tom Carter had made it clear Austin was a marked man. The community hall blazed with light and music when they arrived, the sound of fiddles and laughter spilling out into the evening air. Victoria hesitated at the door, suddenly aware of how long it had been since she had been part of something like this, part of the normal social fabric of town life. But Austin's hand covered hers where it rested on his arm, warm and reassuring, and she forced herself forward. The room fell briefly silent when they entered, heads turning to stare at the new marshal and the crippled saloon owner. Victoria felt the weight of their gazes, the whispered questions and speculations, and her old defensive anger stirred. But then Mayor Turnbull was approaching with a wide smile, his wife on his arm, and the moment passed. "Marshal Ellis, Miss Grayson, so glad you could come. We were just about to start the first dance." The mayor's eyes twinkled with something that might have been matchmaking glee. "I trust you'll be joining us on the floor." "Actually, we thought we'd sit this one out," Austin said easily, steering Victoria toward the chairs that lined the walls. "I'm not much for dancing, and Miss Grayson has been on her feet all day at the saloon, but we're happy to enjoy the music and the company." It was such a smooth deflection that Victoria felt a surge of gratitude so strong it brought tears to her eyes. Austin settled her into a chair with the same care he might show a queen, then took the seat beside her, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. The music started up again, couples taking to the floor in a lively reel that set skirts spinning and boots stomping. Victoria watched with the familiar ache of longing and loss, remembering when she had been one of those dancers, when her body had moved with grace and joy instead of pain and limitation. But Austin's presence beside her, solid and comforting, took some of the sting from the memory. "Tell me about it," he said quietly, his voice barely audible under the music. "Tell me what it was like when you could dance." Victoria glanced at him, surprised by the request. "Why?" "Because I want to know you, all of you. The you that existed before the accident and the you that exists now." Austin's eyes held hers, serious and intent. "Tell me about dancing." So she did. In a quiet voice that grew stronger as she went, Victoria described what it had felt like to move across a dance floor, the way music entered through her ears and became motion in her body. The pure joy of spinning and leaping and creating art with nothing but herself and the rhythm. She told him about performing in Denver when she was 18, about the applause and the feeling of being truly alive in a way that nothing else matched. "It was like flying," she said finally, "watching a young couple execute a perfect turn. like being more than human, just for a moment. And when it was gone, it felt like losing a limb, like losing part of my soul. But you kept going, Austin observed. You didn't give up, even when you lost the thing you loved most. I didn't have a choice. Life doesn't stop just because you want it to. Victoria turned to face him fully. You learn to build something new from the broken pieces. It's not the same as what you had, but it's still worth building. You're extraordinary, Victoria Grayson. Austin said it simply, like stating a fact, and the use of her first name sent warmth spreading through her chest. I hope you know that. I'm ordinary, just stubborn. But she smiled as she said it, feeling lighter than she had in months. They sat together through several more dances, commenting on the other guests, sharing stories and laughter. Austin brought her lemonade and cookies from the refreshment table, and Victoria introduced him to various townspeople who approached to make conversation. It was surprisingly pleasant, being part of the social fabric again, and Victoria found herself relaxing in a way she had not known she needed. Then the band struck up a waltz, slow and sweet, and Austin stood, offering his hand. "Dance with me," he said. Victoria stared at him. "I told you I can't. I can barely walk, let alone waltz." "I'm not asking you to waltz. I'm asking you to stand with me and sway to the music and let me hold you." Austin's hand remained extended, patient and steady. "Please, Victoria, dance with me. However, we need to make that work." Victoria looked at his hand, at his face, at the genuine hope and tenderness in his expression. Every logical thought in her head screamed at her to refuse, to protect herself from the humiliation and pain of trying to do something she could no longer do. But something deeper than logic, something that had been awakening since Austin walked into her life, pushed her to reach out and take his hand. He pulled her gently to her feet, then led her not to the crowded dance floor but to a quieter corner of the room where they would not be jostled. One hand settled at her waist, careful and respectful, while the other held hers. He did not try to make her move in any traditional dance pattern, just held her close and swayed gently to the music, letting her weight shift naturally with the rhythm. "I cannot dance with this heavy frame," Victoria whispered, blinking back tears. The metal brace bit into her hip, the weight of it a constant reminder of everything she had lost. "I'm sorry, Austin, I can't." "Then let's make our own music together," Austin said softly, his breath warm against her temple. "This isn't about steps or patterns. It's about being here together, moving to something beautiful. That's all dancing ever was, really, being together in the music." And somehow, impossibly, it worked. They swayed together in their corner, barely moving but moving enough, and Victoria felt something inside her chest crack open and release. Tears streamed down her face, but they were not entirely sad tears. They were the complicated tears of grief and joy mixed together, of letting go and holding on simultaneously, of being seen and accepted completely for who she was in this moment. "Thank you," she breathed, her face pressed against his shoulder. "Thank you for this. Thank you for trusting me with it." Austin's arms tightened around her, protective and careful all at once. "I meant what I said earlier. You're extraordinary, Victoria. This leg, this brace, it's part of your story, but it's not all of your story. You're so much more than what you've lost." They stayed like that through the end of the waltz, and into the beginning of the next song, creating their own small world of movement and music in the midst of the larger celebration. When Victoria finally stepped back, her legs screaming with pain but her heart fuller than it had been in years, she saw that several people were watching them with expressions that ranged from touching sympathy to genuine happiness. Ruth was crying openly, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief, and even Mayor Turnbull looked a bit misty. "I think we just became the talk of the town," Victoria said, trying to regain her composure as Austin led her back to their chairs. Let them talk. All they saw was a man dancing with the woman he's falling in love with. Austin said it casually, but his eyes held hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. That's nothing to be ashamed of, falling in love. Victoria repeated, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might bruise her ribs. Austin, we barely know each other. It's been less than a week. I know. And I'm not asking you to say it back or to feel the same way. I'm just being honest about where I stand. He settled into his chair beside her, his shoulder touching hers. I've been alone a long time, Victoria. I've met a lot of people, been to a lot of places, but I've never met anyone like you. Someone who's been knocked down hard and got back up anyway. Someone who faces fear with defiance and pain with grace. Someone who makes me want to be better, braver, more than I am. Victoria did not know what to say. Her throat had closed with emotion and words seemed inadequate anyway. So instead she reached out and took his hand, lacing their fingers together and holding on tight. They stayed at the social for another hour, leaving only when Victoria's exhaustion became too obvious to ignore. The walk back to her boarding house was slower than the walk there, her leg protesting every step, but Austin never complained or showed impatience. At her door, he paused, his hat in his hands. I have to move against the Carters soon, he said quietly. Tomorrow, probably. They're getting more aggressive, and I can't wait any longer without risking more innocent people. Fear clutched at Victoria's heart. It's too dangerous. You need help, deputies, something more than just yourself. I've been talking to some of the men in town. A few have agreed to deputize temporarily when the time comes. But you're right, it's dangerous. That's why I need to say this now before anything happens. Austin stepped closer, his free hand coming up to cup her face with heartbreaking gentleness. Whatever happens tomorrow, know that meeting you changed my life. Know that these past days have been some of the best I've ever had. Know that you gave me something to fight for beyond just duty or justice. Austin, don't. Victoria's voice broke. Don't talk like you're not coming back. I intend to come back. I intend to court you properly, take you to more socials, maybe convince you to let me kiss you if you're inclined. His thumb brushed across her cheek, wiping away a tear she had not realized she shed. But if something goes wrong, I need you to know what you've meant to me. You cannot die, Victoria said fiercely, her hands fisting in the front of his shirt. You hear me, Austin Ellis. You cannot die, not now, not when I'm just starting to believe in things again. Then I won't. He leaned down slowly, giving her time to pull away, and pressed his lips to her forehead in a kiss that was more promise than passion. I'll come back to you, Victoria. I swear it. He left her on the porch of the boarding house, walking away into the darkness with his head held high and his gun at his hip. Victoria watched until she could no longer see him, then went inside and climbed the stairs to her room where she sat at her window and prayed to a God she was not sure she believed in anymore, begging for Austin's safety and return. Sunday morning dawned bright and clear, the kind of perfect autumn day that made Victoria's fear and worry seem almost obscene. She went to the saloon earlier than usual, unable to bear the waiting alone in her room, and found Jimmy already there, cleaning glasses with more vigor than necessary. You heard? He asked without preamble. Heard what? Marshal Ellis deputized 5 men last night after the social, got them together at his office and swore them in. They're planning to arrest Tom Carter and his gang this morning when they ride in for their usual Sunday drinking. Jimmy set down a glass and met her eyes. It's going to be a bloodbath, Miss Victoria. The Carters won't go quietly. Victoria sank into a chair, her leg and her heart both aching. Where? Main Street, most likely. Marshall's setting up positions now. Jimmy came around the bar and put a hand on her shoulder. You should stay here. Stay inside where it's safe." But Victoria knew she could not stay inside, could not hide while Austin risked his life. She pushed herself to her feet, ignoring her protesting leg. "No, I'm going out there." "Miss Victoria, please. The marshal would want you safe." "The marshal doesn't get to decide." Victoria grabbed her cane and headed for the door. "I spent 2 years hiding, Jimmy. I'm done hiding." Main Street was eerily quiet when she emerged, the usual Sunday morning bustle replaced by a tense stillness that made her skin prickle. She could see Austin in front of the marshal's office, checking his gun with methodical precision. 4 men stood with him, townspeople she recognized. The blacksmith, the hotel owner, a young rancher named Tom who was only 22 but had a reputation for steadiness under pressure. And unexpectedly, Dr. Morrison with his medical bag slung over his shoulder. Austin's head snapped up when he saw her, his expression cycling through surprise, concern, and resignation. He crossed the street quickly, his long strides eating the distance between them. "Victoria, you need to go back inside." "No," she met his eyes without flinching. "I'm staying." "It's dangerous. The Carters will be here any minute, and when we try to arrest them, there will be gunfire." Austin's hands came to rest on her shoulders, his grip urgent. "Please, Victoria, I can't do what I need to do if I'm worried about you getting hurt. Then do it knowing I believe in you. Do it knowing I'm here because I trust you to come back to me." Victoria reached up and covered one of his hands with hers. "I'm not asking to be part of the fight, Austin. I'm just asking to be here, to be present, so you know what you're fighting for." Austin looked at her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Stay behind cover. If shooting starts, you get inside the nearest building and you stay down. Promise me." "I promise." He kissed her then, quick and hard and desperate, his lips pressing against hers with an intensity that stole her breath. When he pulled back, his eyes blazed with emotion. "I love you, Victoria Grayson, and I'm coming back to tell you that properly when this is done." He returned to his position before she could respond, leaving her standing in the street with her heart pounding and her lips still tingling from that fierce kiss. She moved to the boardwalk in front of the general store, positioning herself where she had a clear view but was behind the partial cover of a support post. The wait felt eternal, though it could not have been more than 10 minutes. Then the sound of hoofbeats echoed down Main Street, and the Carter gang rode into view, 7 men mounted on horses and bristling with weapons. They seemed utterly unconcerned, laughing and talking among themselves, confident in their power and untouchability. "Tom Carter." Austin's voice rang out clear and commanding. "Jack Carter, you and your men are under arrest for extortion, assault, and attempted murder. Dismount and surrender your weapons peacefully." The street fell silent except for the nervous shifting of horses. Tom Carter's laughter broke the stillness, ugly and mocking. "You got to be joking, Marshal. You and what army? This one." Austin gestured, and his 5 deputies emerged from their positions, forming a loose perimeter around the gang. Each man held a rifle steady and aimed. "You're outnumbered and outgunned. Make this easy on everyone and come along peaceful." For a moment, Victoria thought it might actually work. Tom Carter's expression flickered with uncertainty, his eyes calculating the odds. But then Jack Carter, drunk even this early in the morning and always the more volatile of the brothers, went for his gun with a wild shout. The world exploded into violence. Gunshots cracked like thunder, horses screamed and reared, men dove for cover or fell clutching wounds. Victoria pressed herself against the wall of the general store, her hands over her ears but her eyes unable to look away. She saw Austin moving with lethal precision, his gun firing once, twice, each shot deliberate and controlled. She saw Jack Carter fall from his horse, clutching his shoulder. She saw one of the gang members shoot the blacksmith in the leg before being taken down by return fire. The fight lasted maybe 2 minutes, but felt like hours. When the smoke cleared and the echoes faded, 3 of the Carter gang lay dead in the street. 2 more were wounded and being disarmed by deputies, and Tom and Jack Carter were on their knees with their hands behind their heads. Austin stood over them, his gun still drawn, his face hard as granite. "Get them to the jail," he ordered his deputies. "Dr. Morrison, see to the wounded, both ours and theirs. Everyone stays calm and we finish this right." Victoria sagged against the wall, her legs shaking so badly she thought she might fall. But then Austin was there, holstering his gun and pulling her into his arms with a fierceness that bordered on desperation. "You're alive," she breathed against his chest, her hands clutching the back of his coat. "You're alive. I promised, didn't I?" His voice was rough, shaken despite the calm he had projected moments ago. "Are you hurt? Did anything hit you?" "No, I'm fine, I'm fine." She pulled back enough to look at his face, to reassure herself that he was whole and unhurt. A graze on his left arm showed where a bullet had come too close, but otherwise he seemed unscathed. "Your arm." "Barely felt it. I'll have Morrison look at it later." Austin cupped her face in both hands, his eyes searching hers. "You shouldn't have been here. That was foolish and dangerous, and it terrified me knowing you were watching. I had to be. I had to see." Victoria covered his hands with hers. "You did it, Austin. You actually did it. We did it. This town did it." He glanced back at the scene behind them, where his deputies were hauling the surviving Carter gang members toward the jail and townspeople were beginning to emerge cautiously from buildings. "It's over, Victoria. The Carters are done. Breckenridge is free." A cheer went up from the gathering crowd, spontaneous and joyful. People flooded into the street, shaking Austin's hand, clapping him on the back, offering thanks and congratulations. Victoria found herself swept up in the celebration, accepting hugs from Ruth and Mary, who had come running from the saloon. Listening to Mayor Turnbull declare that this was a great day for Breckenridge and Marshal Ellis was a hero. But through it all, Victoria's eyes kept finding Austin's across the crowd, and each time they connected she saw the same message reflected back at her. "We survived, we won, and now we get to figure out what comes next." The next hours passed in a blur of activity. The surviving Carter gang members were locked in the jail to await trial, their wounded treated by Dr. Morrison under armed guard. The townspeople organized a celebration that turned into an impromptu party in the street, with food and music and a sense of collective relief that was almost palpable. The blacksmith's leg wound turned out to be superficial, and he was already talking about the story he would tell his grandchildren someday. Victoria retreated to the saloon when the noise and press of people became too much, her legs screaming from standing so long and her emotions stretched thin. She was in her office, attempting to work on accounts but mostly just staring at the numbers without seeing them, when Austin knocked and entered without waiting for permission. He looked exhausted, his face lined with weariness and his movements slower than usual. But when he saw her, something in his expression lightened and he crossed the room to pull her up from her chair and into his arms. "I need to hold you," he said simply. "Just for a minute. I need to know this is real." Victoria wrapped her arms around his waist and pressed her face against his chest, listening to the steady thump of his heart. "It's real. We're both here. It's over. It's over," he repeated, and she felt some of the tension drain from his body. They stood like that for a long time, neither speaking, just taking comfort in the physical proof of each other's survival and presence. Finally, Austin pulled back enough to look at her face, his hands coming up to frame it with a gentleness that seemed at odds with the violence he had dealt earlier. "I meant what I said before. I love you, Victoria. I know it's fast. I know we haven't known each other long, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life." Victoria felt tears prick her eyes, but they were happy tears this time. "I love you too. I think I started falling the moment you walked into my office and looked at me like I was whole instead of broken. You are whole. You've always been whole." Austin's thumb brushed across her cheek, catching a tear. "Your leg doesn't define you any more than my scars define me. We're both more than what hurt us." He kissed her then, properly this time, his lips soft and searching against hers. Victoria kissed him back with all the emotion she had been holding in, all the fear and hope and desperate love that had built up over the past week. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Austin rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said. "I know it's too soon. I know I should court you properly for months before asking, but marry me anyway. I don't want to waste any more time when I've finally found what I've been looking for." Victoria laughed, the sound watery but genuine. "You're right, it's too soon. It's absurd and impulsive and completely irrational. But," Austin's eyes held hers, hopeful and vulnerable, "but yes. Yes, I'll marry you." She kissed him again, quick and joyful. "When?" "As soon as possible. Tomorrow, if we can get Pastor Williams to agree." Austin's smile was brilliant, transforming his whole face. "I want everyone to know you're mine and I'm yours. I want to build a life with you, Victoria. Whatever that looks like. It might not be easy. I'm not an easy woman to love." Victoria gestured at her leg, at the room around them, at all the complications her life entailed. "I come with a business and responsibilities and a body that doesn't work right. I can't give you normalcy." "I don't want normalcy, I want you." Austin's voice was fierce, certain. "Every complicated, stubborn, beautiful part of you, and we'll figure out the rest together." They were married 3 days later in a small ceremony at the church, with half the town in attendance and Ruth crying so hard she could barely play the piano. Victoria wore her mother's wedding dress, carefully altered to accommodate her frame, and carried wildflowers that Austin had picked himself that morning. Dr. Morrison gave her away in her father's absence, and Mayor Turnbull served as Austin's best man. When Pastor Williams pronounced them husband and wife and Austin kissed her in front of everyone, Victoria felt something click into place in her chest, a sense of rightness and belonging she had not known she was missing. They walked back down the aisle together, Victoria on Austin's arm, her cane in her other hand, and for the first time in 2 years she did not feel diminished by the contrast between what she had been and what she was. She felt whole. The reception was held at the Golden Spur Saloon, which Jimmy had decorated with more enthusiasm than skill, resulting in streamers and flowers everywhere, and a general air of cheerful chaos. There was food and music and dancing, and at one point Austin pulled Victoria into the same corner where they had swayed together at the social and held her close while the fiddle played a sweet waltz. "Our own music," he murmured against her hair. "Always our own music." "Always," Victoria agreed, and let herself relax into his arms, into the moment, into the beautiful imperfection of their love. The autumn passed in a blur of adjustment and joy. Victoria continued running the saloon, but with Austin's help, the business began to thrive again. His presence lent legitimacy and security, and customers who had been afraid to patronize the establishment during the Carter gang's reign returned in droves. Austin hired 2 deputies to help maintain order in Breckenridge, good men who took their work seriously. And slowly, the town transformed from a place of fear to a place of hope. They lived above the saloon in rooms that Victoria renovated to accommodate both of them. creating a home that was neither too feminine nor too masculine, but somehow perfectly theirs. Austin proved surprisingly domestic, cooking breakfast most mornings and insisting on doing his share of the household work despite Victoria's protests that she could manage. "We're partners," he told her one evening as he washed dishes while she dried. "In everything." "That means sharing the work and the joy equally." Victoria leaned against him, her hip touching his. "I'm not used to having a partner. I'm used to doing everything alone." "I know, but you don't have to anymore." Austin set down a plate and turned to face her fully. "I'm here, Victoria. For all of it. The good days and the bad ones. The days your leg hurts so much you can barely walk and the days you feel strong. I'm here." He proved it over and over in the months that followed. When winter came hard, and the cold made Victoria's leg ache with a vengeance, Austin learned to massage the muscles around the brace, his strong hands working out knots and tension with patient skill. When the saloon had a particularly difficult night with rowdy customers, he appeared without being asked to help restore order and make sure everyone got home safely. When Victoria woke from nightmares about the accident, about wagons and breaking bones, he held her until the shaking stopped and talked her back to calmness with his steady voice. In March of 1881, 5 months after their wedding, Victoria discovered she was pregnant. She stood in their bedroom staring at the wash basin where she had been sick for the 3rd morning in a row, and felt a complicated mix of joy and terror. Her body had been so damaged by the accident, she had assumed children were not in her future. But Dr. Morrison confirmed it with a smile and a reassurance that, while she would need to be careful, there was no reason she could not carry a baby to term. Telling Austin was one of the hardest and best things she had ever done. She waited until evening, until they were alone in their rooms after the saloon had closed for the night, and then she simply blurted it out with none of the grace or planning she had intended. "I'm pregnant." Austin, who had been removing his gun belt, froze. "What?" "I'm pregnant." "About 2 months, Morrison thinks." Victoria twisted her hands together, suddenly uncertain. "I know we didn't plan this, I know it complicates things, but I want this baby, I want our baby." Austin crossed the room in 3 strides and swept her into his arms, lifting her off her feet despite her protests about her weight and the brace. "Victoria Grayson Ellis, you just made me the happiest man in Colorado, hell, in the entire country. You're happy." Victoria clung to his shoulders, relief flooding through her. "You're not worried." "Of course I'm worried. I'm terrified, but I'm also happier than I knew how to be." He set her down gently, his hands coming to rest on her still flat stomach. "We're going to be parents. We're going to have a child." "That's extraordinary." The pregnancy was not easy. Victoria's damaged leg struggled with the additional weight, and by her 6th month, she needed a cane to walk even short distances. But Austin was there through all of it, patient and supportive, taking over more of the saloon's physical work and making sure she rested when she needed to. The townspeople rallied around them as well, bringing food and offering help and showing a kindness that brought Victoria to tears more than once. In late September of 1881, exactly 1 year after the shootout with the Carter gang, Victoria went into labor. It was a long, difficult birth that lasted nearly 20 hours and left her exhausted and shaking. But when Dr. Morrison finally placed a squalling, red-faced baby boy in her arms, Victoria felt a surge of love so powerful it eclipsed everything else. "He's perfect," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Austin, look at him. He's perfect." Austin, who had refused to leave her side despite the doctor's suggestions that he wait elsewhere, knelt beside the bed with his own eyes wet. "He is. He's absolutely perfect. What should we name him?" They had discussed names endlessly over the past months, but in that moment, Victoria knew exactly what felt right. "James, after my father, James Ellis." "James," Austin repeated, reaching out to touch his son's tiny hand. "Hello, James. Welcome to the world." Baby James proved to be as stubborn and determined as his mother, crying lustily when he wanted something and refusing to sleep for more than 2 hours at a stretch. But he was healthy and strong, and watching Austin cradle their son with such tenderness and wonder made Victoria fall in love with her husband all over again. The years that followed were not without challenges. Victoria's leg never fully healed, and there were days when the pain was so intense she could barely function. The saloon had its ups and downs, struggling during economic downturns and thriving when the mining industry boomed. Austin faced danger multiple times as marshal, dealing with outlaws and disputes, and the general lawlessness that still plagued frontier towns. But they faced it all together, partners in every sense of the word. In 1883, they had a second child, a daughter they named Emily Rose after Austin's sister. Emily proved to be quieter than James, more contemplative, with her father's green eyes and her mother's stubborn chin. Austin doted on her shamelessly, and Victoria often found him in the nursery at odd hours just watching their daughter sleep with an expression of complete contentment. "You're going to spoil her," Victoria said one evening, finding him there yet again. "Absolutely I am." Austin did not take his eyes off Emily, who was sleeping peacefully in her crib. "She's going to know every day of her life that her father thinks she hung the moon." Victoria leaned against him, wrapping her arm around his waist. "You're a good father, Austin. The best I could have imagined for our children. I learned from the best." He kissed the top of her head, his free arm coming around her shoulders. "You're an amazing mother, Victoria. I see you with them, the patience and love, and I'm in awe. I'm just doing what comes naturally." "Nothing about parenting comes naturally. We're all making it up as we go." Austin turned to face her fully, his expression serious. "But we're doing it together, and that makes all the difference." In 1885, when James was 4 and Emily was 2, Emily Rose Ellis came to visit from Cheyenne. Austin's sister was a force of nature, a small woman with iron determination and a laugh that filled rooms. She and Victoria bonded instantly over their shared experiences of physical limitation and stubborn refusal to let it define them. "Austin tells me you used to dance," Emily said one afternoon as they sat in the parlor watching the children play. "I'd love to hear about it." Victoria found herself describing those old days, the performances and the joy of movement, things she had not talked about in years. Emily listened with the intensity of someone who truly understood, and when Victoria finished, Emily nodded thoughtfully. "You should teach," she said. "Not dancing the way you used to, but teaching others, especially girls who think they can't dance because they're different somehow. Show them there are different ways to make music." The idea took root slowly, but by the end of Emily's visit, Victoria had decided to try. She started offering dance lessons in the saloon's upper room during afternoons, teaching simple steps and patterns to anyone who wanted to learn. She could not demonstrate the way she used to, but she found she could teach through words and occasional assisted movement, and her students thrived. One of her first students was a girl named Catherine who walked with crutches due to a childhood illness. Catherine was 13 and convinced she would never be able to dance, but Victoria worked with her patiently, finding ways to adapt steps to accommodate the crutches, turning them into part of the dance rather than an obstacle. The day Catherine performed a simple waltz for her parents, tears streaming down her face with joy, Victoria felt something in her own heart heal. "You're making a difference," Austin told her that night, his pride evident. Not just for Catherine, but for all those kids who thought they couldn't do something beautiful because they were different. "I'm just showing them what you showed me," Victoria replied. "That limitations don't have to mean endings. They can mean new beginnings." The years continued to pass, each one bringing new challenges and joys. James grew into a serious boy who loved books and learning, while Emily proved to be a firecracker with a talent for getting into mischief. In 1888, Victoria gave birth to a third child, another son they named Thomas after Dr. Morrison, who had saved Victoria's leg and delivered all three of their children. Thomas was a happy baby who seemed determined to smile at everyone he met. Austin continued as marshal through all of it, earning a reputation as a fair but firm lawman who cared deeply about the town and its people. He turned down opportunities to move to bigger towns with better pay, insisting that Breckenridge was home and he had no desire to leave. "Everything I love is here," he told Victoria when she asked if he ever regretted staying. "You, our children, this life we've built. Why would I want to be anywhere else?" On their 10th wedding anniversary in 1890, Austin surprised Victoria by taking her back to the community hall where they had first danced together. The building was empty, just the two of them and a violinist Austin had hired for the occasion. He led her onto the floor and pulled her close, swaying to the music in the same gentle rhythm they had created a decade before. "Still making our own music," he murmured, "always." Victoria rested her head on his shoulder, feeling the familiar weight of the brace against her leg and the familiar strength of Austin's arms around her. "I love you, Austin Ellis, more now than even on our wedding day. I love you too, more than I knew it was possible to love another person." He kissed her softly, tenderly. "Thank you for taking a chance on a drifter, Marshal, with more courage than sense. Thank you for seeing me as whole when I felt broken." Victoria pulled back enough to look at his face, at the lines that time and sun and laughter had etched there. "Thank you for teaching me that losing what you love doesn't mean you can't love again. Just differently." They danced until the violinist's fingers grew tired, until the moon rose high and cast silver light through the windows. Then they walked home together through the quiet streets of Breckenridge, Victoria leaning on Austin's arm, both of them content in the silence and the simple joy of being together. The years that followed brought the usual mix of triumph and tragedy that life in a frontier town entailed. There were droughts and booms, births and deaths, celebrations and sorrows. Victoria's dance classes grew in popularity, and eventually she had to hire an assistant to help manage all the students. Austin trained a successor as marshal, a young man named Daniel who had the right mix of courage and compassion, and took a position as town sheriff that allowed him more time at home with his family. James grew into a thoughtful young man who wanted to be a lawyer, inspired by his father's commitment to justice. Emily inherited both her mother's stubbornness and her father's steady nature, and announced at 16 that she intended to be a doctor. Thomas proved to be the artistic one, drawing and painting everything he saw with a talent that reminded Victoria of Austin's sister Emily. In 1900, on the 20th anniversary of the shootout that had brought Austin to Breckenridge and changed both their lives, the town held a celebration. Mayor Turnbull, now in his 70s and thinking about retirement, gave a speech about how far Breckenridge had come in 2 decades, how it had transformed from a town living in fear to a thriving community built on law and hope. "Much of that transformation can be credited to 2 people," the mayor said, gesturing to where Austin and Victoria sat with their children. "Marshal Ellis, who had the courage to stand against evil when others had failed, and Victoria Ellis, who showed us all what real strength looks like. They built a life together, and in doing so, they helped build this town into something we can all be proud of. The crowd applauded, and Victoria felt her cheeks heat with embarrassment and pleasure. Austin squeezed her hand, his eyes warm with love and pride. At 52 and 53, respectively, they were no longer young, but the years had been kind to them in the ways that mattered. Austin's hair was more gray than dark now, and Victoria's face bore the lines of a life fully lived, but they were still Austin and Victoria, still partners and lovers and best friends. "Can you believe it's been 20 years?" Victoria said that night as they prepared for bed, a ritual so familiar it felt like a dance of its own. Sometimes it feels like yesterday, sometimes like a lifetime ago. Both, probably. Austin came to stand behind her, his hands settling on her shoulders with the easy intimacy of decades. "I look at you and I still see the woman I met in that saloon office, brave and stubborn and trying so hard not to let anyone see how much she hurt. But I also see all the years between, all the moments that made us who we are now. You have any regrets?" Victoria met his eyes in the mirror, suddenly needing to know. "About staying here, about marrying me, about the life we've had. Not a single one." Austin's hands moved to her waist, turning her to face him. "This life with you, it's been everything I never knew I needed. Every challenge, every joy, every ordinary day has been a gift because I got to share it with you." Victoria reached up to touch his face, her fingers tracing the familiar planes and angles. "I thought my life was over when I lost my ability to dance. I thought nothing would ever be beautiful or meaningful again. But you showed me I was wrong. You showed me that life just takes different shapes, finds different rhythms. That love and joy and purpose don't disappear just because the package they come in changes. We showed each other." Austin kissed her palm, then her wrist, then pulled her close for a proper kiss that still had the power to make her heart race after 20 years. "We made our own music, remember, together, always together." They stood there in their bedroom, holding each other in the lamplight. Two people who had found each other against impossible odds and built something beautiful from broken pieces. Outside, Breckenridge slept peacefully, safe and thriving, a testament to courage and love and the stubborn refusal to give up when life knocked you down. Victoria thought about the young woman she had been at 21, crippled and afraid and convinced her life was over. She thought about the man who had walked into her office with sage green eyes and a determination to make things right. She thought about all the moments between then and now, the challenges and triumphs, the children they had raised and the life they had built, and she felt nothing but gratitude. "I love you," she whispered against Austin's chest. "I will love you until the day I die and probably beyond that." "I love you too," Austin replied, his arms tightening around her. "My dancing girl, my stubborn saloon owner, my wife, my partner in making beautiful music from broken things. I will love you always." And he did, for all the years that remained to them. They lived to see their children grown and married, to meet grandchildren who carried pieces of them both into a new century. They lived to celebrate 50 years of marriage, surrounded by family and friends in a Breckenridge that had grown from a rough mining town into a proper city. They lived full lives, rich with love and purpose, and the deep satisfaction of knowing they had made a difference. When Austin died peacefully in his sleep at the age of 78, Victoria grieved deeply, but without bitterness. They had been given more than 50 years together, a gift she had never expected and never took for granted. She lived another 3 years after his death, still teaching dance to anyone who wanted to learn, still showing young people that limitations were just invitations to find new ways to move through the world. On the evening of her 81st birthday, surrounded by children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, Victoria told the story one last time of how she had met Austin, how he had asked her to dance when she insisted she could not, how he had suggested they make their own music together. Her great-granddaughter, a girl of 15 who walked with a limp from a riding accident, listened with shining eyes. "So you did dance again?" the girl asked. "Even with your injured leg?" "I did," Victoria confirmed, smiling at the memory. "Not the way I had before, but in a way that was just as beautiful. Maybe more beautiful because I had to work harder for it, had to learn that there are many ways to make music and move with grace. And I had a partner who believed in me, who saw me as whole when I felt broken, who taught me that love and courage can create new kinds of beauty from old sorrows. I hope I find someone like that someday," the girl said wistfully. "You will if you stay open to it. And in the meantime, you can be that person for yourself." Victoria took the girl's hand, her own gnarled with age but still strong. "Don't wait for someone else to show you that you're whole. Know it yourself. Live it. Dance your own dance, whatever that looks like, and let the right person be honored to join you in the music you're already making." Victoria Ellis died in her sleep 2 weeks later, her last conscious thought a memory of Austin's arms around her, swaying to music in a dim corner of a dance hall, creating something beautiful and entirely their own. She died content, fulfilled, certain that she had lived well and loved better, that she had taken the broken pieces of her life and turned them into something meaningful. The people of Breckenridge mourned her passing but celebrated her life, remembering the woman who had faced down outlaws and injury and loss with equal courage, who had built a business and raised a family and taught generations of children that different did not mean less, that limitation could be transformed into innovation, that the end of one kind of music just meant the beginning of another. On her gravestone next to Austin's, her children inscribed the words that had become her motto, her legacy, her gift to everyone who felt broken and lost. She said, "I cannot dance with this heavy frame." The cowboy said, "Then let's make our own music together." And together they did. Their story became legend in Breckenridge, passed down through generations as a reminder that love can bloom in unexpected places, that courage comes in many forms, and that the most beautiful music is often created by those who refuse to be silenced by circumstance. Austin and Victoria Ellis had lived and loved and left the world better than they found it, and that, in the end, was the finest dance of all.